So the Planning and Regulations Department with Quinte Conservation, it's actually two separate departments that essentially have to work together. So it's essentially one department, but two separate jobs. One is the regulation, so each conservation authority has the same regulation, and what it is, we regulate activity near any water body, and the activities can be anything from construction of houses and sewage systems to any work along the water or in water. So that is a regulations program, so you need permits where you work near water, and essentially what we're trying to do there is, one, protect people from hazards with this program, and really the main hazard in this area is flooding. Planning program is, so essentially we have agreements with our municipalities and with Ministry of Natural Resources where all planning documents are circulated to our office for review. For instance, subdivisions, site plans, severances, minor variances, zoning amendments. So the municipalities circulate all those for our review. And again, our main review is for hazards to make sure none of these or any of these changes affect the hazard. So essentially we prevent a lot of these changes from being taking place within a hazard, but also we have agreements. We look at the natural heritage aspects of these planning documents. So we look at environmental reports, and we also do stormwater reviews, so which is drainage off all these proposals, and we look at groundwater as well. So that's a hydrogeological review.
Most CAs, or all CAs I would assume, have some sort of a planning and regulations department, and that's because under the Conservation Authorities Act, every conservation authority has a regulation, and the regulation permits development in certain areas with permission from that conservation authority. Within our department, we have Paul, who's our supervisor, and then we have Catherine Sinclair and Lindsay Nash and myself, who are all regulations officers. And then we have Sam Carney, who is essentially our planner. And the purpose of our department is to review applications that people put in for development in the areas that we regulate, and then to issue those permits and ensure that the development is safe. It's not in an area that's a natural hazard. It's not in an area that is an ecological feature like a wetland or a watercourse, so that the development ultimately is safe and there's no risk to people or to their property.
And of course, inherently, when you protect people from hazards, you protect the hazard itself. So you protect water bodies, you protect floodplains, you protect wetlands. So it does two things. You protect the public and you actually protect the environment at the same time. As a manager, obviously there's, last year we did over 600 permits. There's often problems with permits. It's my job. I would help the officer with those types of issues. And also as a manager, I do the review for site plans and subdivisions. Each regulations officer, of course, they're in charge of our regulation. It's their job to issue permits under that regulation. So they do inspections of all sites. And mainly what they do is they do a lot of surveying to determine where the floodplain is on each individual property. They might look at slopes, determine if we have a concern with slope stability. They can determine wetland boundaries to assure appropriate setbacks. So again, it relates back to the hazard and to make sure development isn't in the hazard and is appropriately set back from a hazard.
The primary function of the site visits is really to get a sense of what the property looks like ahead of any development occurring on that lot. So if somebody is proposing, say, shoreline work, you want to get a look at what that shoreline looks like before they do the work. So you can see whether or not there is active erosion, you can survey where the floodplain is, and you get to see everything kind of in its native state before somebody goes and does whatever landscaping they want to. Or if somebody is going to, say they're proposing a house or they're proposing a garage, and you need to make sure that they're far enough away from a wetland feature or from a water course, you want to see what that looks like ahead of time before they've gone out and done it. So Sam is our planning and regs technician. So if somebody had a question about, am I in the regulated area, or is this something that I can do, or, you know, would you approve of this severance, that kind of thing. Sam was the go-to person for all of those questions. So she was like the first point of contact for anybody who needed to contact the planning and regs department.
Landowners typically, if they're not aware of a conservation authority, then it's the local building inspector will send landowners our way to obtain a permit. So again, anywhere near the water. So if you're near a wetland or creek or Lake Ontario, you need a permit from Quinte Conservation.
So applications are submitted to our member municipalities for various Planning Act applications, and those are things like if somebody wants to sever a piece of land, or if somebody needs to rezone their property, or they need a minor variance because they want to build something closer to their property boundary or something. The municipality will circulate us on all of those applications, because every conservation authority is responsible for commenting on the natural hazards section of the provincial policy statement. So we have a designated responsibility through the province to comment to make sure that no application coming through the Planning Act is proposed in an area of natural hazards. So Sam reviews all of the Planning Act applications that come into the office. So through all the applications that we get and that we review and that we comment on, hopefully people are able to develop, you know, in areas that are safe and in areas that are low risk, so that whatever it is that they've decided to develop, whether it's their house or their shoreline, is something that's able to stay there for a long time so that they can enjoy it for, you know, a good number of years. We go out into the field for all of the vast majority of the permits that we get, to take a look at the site to make sure it looks like what we think it looks like, and it meets up with the features on our mapping. Sometimes we have to survey things, or we have to delineate a wetland. So we'll do all of that, all of the site visits and everything.
Site visits are required. The two main ones are for floodplain delineation. We have a lot of floodplain maps at our office, but as you can understand, they're not overly accurate. So we accurately determine the floodplain on the ground. And wetland delineation, we do that as well to ensure that it is accurate. And again, it's about appropriate setbacks from wetlands and floodplains. And of course, it's hard to determine if we have concerns with slopes from just looking at an aerial photograph. So look at slopes as well. Wetlands are delineated by looking at the vegetation. So essentially there's only certain plants that can grow in wetlands. So we just look at vegetation, and if you have over 50% wetland species and you have what's called hydric soil, we'll also determine the soil as well, then it's a wetland. The floodplain, when we do that, so this part of Ontario uses the 100-year flood. So the 100 years is essentially a flood event that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So those are specific elevations that have been scientifically determined, and we just survey that elevation. When we're on site delineating a wetland, we will essentially flag the edge of the wetland with flagging tape so that the landowner knows exactly the extent of the wetland. We'll also GPS those flags and put it on an aerial photograph to give to the landowner as well. And as far as floodplain, when we determine via an elevation survey where it is, we will flag that as well, so the landowner knows exactly where the extent of the floodplain is on the ground.
As an enforcement officer with Quinte Conservation, I enforce Section 28 and Section 29 of the Conservation Authorities Act. That's typically the development and interference with wetlands and alterations to shorelines and watercourses regulation that you'd know throughout the province of Ontario. My name is Andrew Farah. I'm the enforcement officer here with Quinte Conservation. Conservation Authorities regulation staff use enforcement as the last tool to deal with violations of a regulation in the watershed. We always try to work with the applicant first, but in the event that we get no progress or that the scale of the development is just too large, we're forced to prosecute or litigate. It is important in the province of Ontario because we've got a great natural environment with many unique natural features that are uncommon anywhere else in the world.
If you own a property, or if you're thinking of owning a property and you're not sure whether or not you need permission, it's really easy to call us. I mean, it could be a 2-minute phone call that you find out whether or not you need a permit, and it's, and that's a really simple thing to do, is to call us than to assume that you don't need something, and then you end up going down the road of having done something wrong. If you have questions, even if you don't even really think that they're that important, it's still worth it to make that, 2 or 3 minute phone call to get your questions answered than it is to just make an assumption about something. We have a lot of information on our website. It is really easy to navigate, and it's really easy to find information on there, and there's a whole planning and regulation section on there. And so you can go through and you can find out about our regulated area, you can look at maps online, you can go through the application online. You can request to talk to one of the regulations officers. There's a pre-consultation service on there, so if you have questions about things, or if you're interested in buying a property and you want to know what you can do with it, you can book a time to speak with one of the regulations officers, and we can do that either on the phone or through Zoom, really whatever is the most convenient, and you can ask all your questions then before you get into the permit process. Or if you kind of have an idea of what you already want to do and you own the property and you want to have staff come out to the property, you can request a site visit, and we'll go out and we'll meet you at your property, and you can, have us walk around and ask us as many questions as you want, and then you'll get a report afterwards that kind of summarizes what we talked about, and it'll go through, any projects that you mentioned or any ideas that you have for the property, and our kind of response to that of, would we be supportive of that or not? And then we tell you how to apply for the permit and how to go through that process. So through our website is a really good way to do it.